Good evening. Welcome to Scarritt Bennett Center's Poets Corner. Tonight we are privileged to have Amy Wright, and she is the author of Paper Concert, a conversation in the round, which BuzzFeed review said Paper Concert is an invitation to slow down and consider complicated questions for which there are no absolute answers. She's an award-winning essayist, author of 3 poetry books and 6 chapbooks. Her essays appear in Georgia Review, Fourth Genre, Kenyon Review, Minding Nature, and elsewhere. Amy has received 2 Peter Taylor Fellowships to the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, an individual artist fellowship from the Tennessee Arts Commission, and a fellowship to Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She has served as the 2022 Wayne G. Bassler Chair of Excellence at East Tennessee State University. She's also the senior editor of Zone 3 Journal, the nonfiction editor of Zone 3 Press, and the coordinator of creative writing at Austin Peay State University. We are glad that you have joined us this evening, whether you are in person or watching us virtually, and I know you will enjoy the next hour listening to Amy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. I'm going to begin with the poem King Dancer, about my experience at ETSU and getting to meet one of the most beautiful trees there in Jonesboro. King Dancer. En route to the second oldest tree in Tennessee, Honeycutt stops by a white oak, trunk wide as his truck bed, canopy broad as a victory garden, slides into the parking lot of a Baptist church where we walk to a cemetery safeguarded by a red oak, slow-voiced as a cage chord on the Sankt Bracardi organ. We wheel past a statue of Chief Junaluska, land my parents' farm 60 miles east, 3 dozen north. Jonesboro, a movie set with its pretty museum, bed and breakfast crowd. Main Street crowned with the 129-foot vault of foliage, the Shanks Oak, flanked by houses and by moss. Overhead, a crow sails, settles, stills on one canoe broad limb, steady as a yogi on a rock, foot in hand, back an arch. I palm the bark of the thunder tree the way my father touched the marble of the Vietnam Memorial. Protected by the city, the landmark Quercus alba earned an audience enduring a life among but above us, a model of what one pulls from great depths with great patience. The glory of earth turned inside out to couple with wind and rain again, 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 again. Riot of a slip drawn from a yet to mighty unbroken thing. I spent quite a bit of time during 2020 and the pandemic helping take care of my father. He and my mother have a farm, a beef cattle farm, and during one unfortunate incident, he ended up getting hurt, and so I went home to help take care of him. And so this was, during that time, we had one of those moments where I saw, like you do on a farm, something that's both beautiful and tragic and horrifying. And my students and I had a conversation just today, about that complicated relationship with beauty, where something isn't quite easy to appreciate the beauty of, like the birth of cattle or in this case, the mouse traps and what they can catch. It's called Goya's Dog. And if you don't know that painting by Goya, it's such a plaintive painting. So it's solid kind of ochre, or kind of a almost like the hardwood on the floor, and it's just a sea of this muddy brown ocean. And in it, the only thing you can see is the dog's head just above the current. So this is Goya's Dog. A farmer makes winter rounds to check for mice, iced pipes, theft. 3 traps in the barn well with Jif. Every third snaps she sets will miss. But one February Tuesday, a loaded spring near the door caught 2 sparrows mid-fight. Frozen in scene. A craze of wings, claws locked, beaks agape, feathers lost. Butter finder versus vying bird. Eyes black as El Perro, drowning in a groundswell. Gaze a private-most plea. The farmer, a mother who lost her youngest, looks at the birds as one looks at death on a farm. Unlocks the hatch, drops them to earth for some scavenger to find. Wind stirs their dead wings against a stayed field of ochre grasses. Past imagining pity or fortune changes anything, she returns the little jaw to the floor, where it resets fine. And then I'm going to read from Cracker Sonnets. This was my very first poems that I wrote that were real poems. And I wrote them, and I ended up getting into grad school at CU Boulder with this submission, and then working on them some while they were there. And they changed dramatically over that amount of time. I mean, as an undergrad, I wrote poems, but these were the first poems that were sort of a series that I knew that they were kind of related to each other in a book-like way. And they came because I got an email from my friend Rod Smith, and he said, he had a Gertrude Stein quote in it, and it said, can you have emotions about crackers? I have emotions about crackers. So that was her line. And then I wrote back to him and I said, I have emotions about crackers. I said, I have emotions about oyster crackers in particular. And so then all of the poems that I was drafting from that time were about literal kind of crackers, oyster crackers, saltine crackers. And I was always thinking of them in that way. But of course, when I went to grad school in Colorado, everyone was like, surely you recognize. And I was like, oh, no, I meant actual crackers, not people. But they were always so peopled. And of course, I'm from Appalachia, so it was inevitable. And so I lost the name Crackers, except for it's still in the title, because this Georgia press liked it. They were like, I know some people like that. And so, but I gave the Crackers names because they went over better that way. And so this is the first poem in the book. Jack's Ovie blows perfect smoke rings in Farnham's musty playhouse. Morning throttles Jax's motor, lowers her frost skirt for him, if someone else's bride. Let lambs work their way up class ladders with starter hats and Nikes, he thinks, when Colleen clicks past, ignoring catcalls, heels snapping concrete, a jar of maraschino cherries jiggling, ready to be tossed into her Alka-Seltzer. Before she drops, wasp-waisted, onto the stage apron, owing nothing to no man, and off all day tomorrow. So growing up middle class and right on the edge of what I came to call the Appalachian sublime, because my neighbors were working class and they seemed to live a life that was so alien and other and free compared to my life. And it was just because they scared me. And also where they lived, it was beyond the state maintained part of the road. And so it was like anything could happen back there. And we would ride our four-wheelers, my brother and I, four-wheelers back up into the wilderness. And it was just like this wild territory beyond, kind of the neighborhood with its fences and stuff. And so, but when I went home this last time to help take care of my dad, this poem came much, much later, but one of my friends who I showed it to said, yes, it's the cracker world has come back. And so you can kind of see where my roots are in this poem. It's called The Only Productive Design. The only productive design is designed waste. Laura Riding Jackson writes in Anarchism is Not Enough. A line that comes to me after seeing how MC left her rental. 3 days after she said she'd be gone, Steve dropped off her keys. Abandoned in the yard, a mower, a bonfire of brush, scrap, lumber, the shed stocked with empties, spent shells, muddy boots, a reloading table, gallons of used antifreeze, a toilet seat, spray paint pooled on the floor, kitchen rotted to the subfloor, door frames gnawed by a dog too long alone. Holes in the walls, a fridge of food expired years ago. But what got me, who didn't own the trailer, was that among the truckloads of trash were dozens of cellophane-sealed containers of baby powder. Aromatic talcum bought in bulk, needed, then not. Among the junk, a mannequin's head suggested MC powdered her scalp. Still, 30 bottles seemed a lot, and left in the cabinet a missed opportunity to sprinkle on the floor a white cross, or pillar, or spiral, to walk away from the residue, take one last bath in a dry tub filled to the lip, don a dust coat to brush off, make something to be swept away with every intention to begin again. Except whether waste is designed or not can only be discerned in hindsight if one fails to waste something by making something, which is insufferable as a koan. When we produce buckets just feeding our faces, better to make nothing, lose even the inmost objective to create. Let all that perfumed hydrous magnesium silicate sift through your fingers like words, unctuous to the touch. So I have such a history with salvage that I think that's where Paper Concert really came from, just because I had interviewed over 50 people over that dozen years and had all these rich conversations, and they were in my head and they had become part of how I thought of the world. But they didn't exist anymore. You publish an interview and then it's in some print journal somewhere on a shelf, and then maybe it's online and it gets to be archived. But it's largely lost, and nowhere did it exist where they were all together like they were inside of me. And so that's why I wanted to do that. And that's where, I see where the poems, like I'm always saving bits, you notice something, you make an observation, and you have some character that you met, and they all kind of keep coming back and circulating. And so that it makes me feel like I don't know, it's rewarding, gratifying to do that. And this is a poem that I wrote specifically about many of the events on the farm that happened. Some of them were quite harsh. So this is a poem about a calf that we found. Calf. Big as a Doberman, dead, black hoof to snout. His dam nudged his jaw, vultures dove the waft. She had not let them at him, or eaten to stand guard. All night and day, beneath a canopy of ice, we left her to mourn. A scarlet garland swung from her as she paced. Not worth the risk, Jay worried on the drive, but I unchained the gate. A recent escapee escorted from the sward, where an incensed number 98 had hidden her newborn. Number 20 was not ready to relinquish Sentinel when R forced her back with the truck. He circled the grove until she gave enough ground. He leapt out. Jay stood by the wheel with a cane she brought. The calf's head lolled when R raised his chest. The cow peaked and rankled with discontent. I helped lift the lithe body into the bed. We drove out of sight, lay the calf in hay behind our house to give his mother rest, if not peace. Let the buzzards, unseen, eat. Where my brother, 19 years gone, picked blackberries with me as a kid, I knelt and washed my gloves against each other with snow. And then, because I was on the farm for so long, longer than I had been since I was a girl, and really when I was a girl, they didn't farm so much. My grandparents farmed, and my parents were insurance agents, and then we had a calf that we fed and things like that, but it wasn't a working farm per se until right about I got to my teenage years, and then my brother got to see more of it. But so I was spending a really concentrated amount of time there, and so I got more invested in. And I've been invested for a long time in the sort of politics of agriculture and land use. But this was at the time when they had the protests in India about the farms. So I talked about this. This is called Reprise. And it begins with a quotation from a farmer named Ajay Veer Singh. And it is, "They sold everything else. Only the farmers are left." Locked down, Punjabi farmers burned in the field. Sugarcane could not wait. Food, once a public good. A 20-something lay on railroad tracks beside his cotton acre. His father helped torch Cargill's plant 30 years prior, rather than sow seed he could not save, indentured to a company says how. Modi should fear God, a Sikh protester said, before his government silenced the press. Cut water to camps in a country owes its independence to protest. Fearing fallout from the more than half the Indian population that farms. Enough farmers to darken skies, burning contracts, like century-old throngs of passenger pigeons. Enough farmers, they used to say, to last. Have you ever heard of a politician committing suicide? Nirmal Singh asks, as if telling a surrealist joke. His father drank a bottle of pesticide. The punchline is fish, just not the kind you can eat. That poem is going to appear in Birmingham Poetry Review, which is one of my favorite poetry journals. And I will read from Everything in the Universe. So these were born of my response to reading about the environment and the climate crisis was to turn toward the insect world because they seemed like they were going to be fine. Because they're so stalwart and crafty and ancient. And so there was a garden at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship where I was going, and this was a story about a little girl there that was helping garden at the UU Fellowship. It's called The World's Unkissed Custodian. Blue black beetles whip meringue loam only to join it, become ferns that curl like a struck child when poked. 3-year-old page unearths the earth in miniature, a pill bug between finger and thumb like a distant moon. Cooing, she pets it, trowel dropped, all digging checked, to coax its clench loose, woo this hidden life out. I told you I like watching children. They're so amazing and free. And this is about my hometown and my neighborhood, so to kind of link some of the stories. It's called Girlhoods Navy. Katydid cymbals crash open windows, four-wing road, ship's crest hemlocks, a famously dark fleet luffing into harbor before diesel transport comes for Victorian-mannered boatswains' granddaughters. Blue ridge becoming bluer, first cadence to envelop Jason in his dragon's tooth zippered jacket. Mary, our school bus siren, whose epileptic brain seizes thousands of times per minute, whose limbs fire as if stung. Exempt from rules for seen but not heard children, her ecstatic laughter climaxes over our goings out and coming in, beating windward, sailors with calenture imagining the ocean a green field we might throw ourselves in. Eyes averted to those cliffs mother climbed once and stranded, our raven-haired maiden perched on her seat back, calling us to the depths. You romanticize things when you're in the country for a long time. Probably have to end with Old Glassy just because she was so inspiring. I think especially because I had a Victorian-minded grandfather, and because in Appalachia we were taught to be, self-reliant and not to speak unless spoken to and things like that. And so I got to admire and sometimes voice some of my rebellion through my characters, whether they were cracker characters or whether they were insects. And so Old Glassy speaks her piece. She gets to be one of my voices of discontent and rebellion. Old Glassy speaks her piece. What you call Dame de Paris, water peacock, silver pin, dragonflies don't bother with. Name neither ourselves nor each long-legged crane fly. Over 300 million years, allostrops drop into mangroves, wingspans wide as crows, borne aloft on oxygen fields, imprint in what will be rock. You move on. Find pure water, attend a body, call it caddis, mosquito, mayfly. We've caught it. Flat abdomens ready for life in the air. Night spills shot down marble halls of cicadas. We barely hear it. Smell no croissants, diesel burp. We are diamond-minded hunters. Little nuns, you say, eyes in back of our head like the devil's grandmother. We are older than the devil, youngsters, older than sand spun into glass to which you compare us, older than your oldest word, our diaphanous oars sheer light from air, 30,000 lenses scanning your baubles with indifference. Thank you. You want to hear it again? Okay, sure. She's a tough one. I like the, thank you. Old Glassy speaks her piece. What you call Dame de Paris, water peacock, silver pin, dragonflies don't bother with. Name neither ourselves nor each long-legged crane fly. Over 300 million years, allostrops drop into mangroves, wingspans wide as crows, borne aloft on oxygen, fields imprint in what will be rock. You move on, find pure water, attend a body, call it caddis, mosquito, mayfly. We've caught it. Flat abdomens ready for life in the air. Night spills shot down marble halls of cicadas. We barely hear it. Smell no croissants, diesel burp. We are diamond-minded hunters. Little nuns, you say, eyes in back of our heads like the devil's grandmother. We are older than the devil, youngsters, older than sand spun into glass, to which you compare us, older than your oldest word, our diaphanous oars, sheer light from air, 30,000 lenses scanning, excuse me, 30,000 lenses scanning your baubles with indifference. So it was comforting. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
How long does it take you to write a poem or redo, or how many times? I mean,
It's a good question. And, I often encourage my students, it so often doesn't look glamorous. And if you were paid by the hour, you would be broke, because, it's a labor of love. You go back and you go back and you go back to it. But sometimes, and this is the draw and the kind of lure, sometimes they come out whole cloth and you barely tweak them at all. And that was, occasionally that happens. There was one I wrote about this Robert Hooke was, right when the microscope was invented, everyone didn't have access to microscopes. And so he would look into the microscope and draw things, and he would draw flies and fleas and the legs. And so I was just inspired by that. And he was doing this for the king, he was commissioned. And so I wrote a poem about these drawings that he was basically conveying from, educating the masses. On the beauty of a flea's legs and how they could spring. And if you watch them, it is unbelievable, how far they can spring with just such small appendages. And so that poem came out kind of whole cloth, but that is the one in, 50 poems or something. Most of them take a lot longer than that. And it depends. Sometimes easier than others. Right now I'm practicing, and it's very much like exercise. The more you're kind of lubricating those mental passages, I think the easier it does get. Paper Concert, I put that together really in a week, but it took much longer. I added things, and I put together what became the essay that got published in about a week with slight tweaks afterwards. And that was a sizable accomplishment for a poet who, labors over a sentence and might work for 2 hours and just change. People are constantly on Twitter like, I worked for 4 hours and all I did was add a comma, So there are those days where you add, and then I took it back out, or. So it's, I don't know, you have to be real finicky about language and love playing with words an awful lot.
And you can hear that in your poetry.
Good.
The language, I mean, there's a richness, a depth. How do you know when you're finished?
There's the $1 million question.
You might repeat it so people know.
Yeah, how do you know when you're finished? You ultimately, the book publishes, and eventually you have to let go of it. But I have probably more than most an ability to let them be, just because I'm a finisher, and I just like the idea that it is complete. And a lot of times I think I actually am probably a little premature in judging the poems finished, because I'll send them out. I'm not alone in that, but I know that I have a tendency to sort of preemptively send them out. And whether they're rejected or not, I look back and I'm like, it could be better. It could, could spend a little bit more time on it. And so now I've gotten a little bit better, thanks to advice of people who love me, hold on, don't just send it immediately. Let it sit, see how you feel in a week, and so I've gotten a little bit better about that. But there's something so gratifying about having it finished, and there's the energy of having made something. Yeah, I'm a little impatient, I think, to call it good. It's a good thing I'm not a parent, probably. Thanks for asking that.
Your description of Jonesboro, 'cause we have family that live right near there.
Really?
I've been there. I could see it listening to you.
Good.
But do most of your poems get grounded in a place, in a physical place?
A lot of times, because I grew up on the farm, so the question was whether my poems are grounded in a physical place, and a lot of times when I do like to be grounded and oriented. Nature, I really only have two subjects. It's either nature or culture, and Appalachian culture, largely. And so it's just sort of like, those are my subjects. And so they're handily, they're often, together, and they intertwine in some way. But I think a lot of times I go back to, the Blue Ridge Mountains. They're in, most of my work at some point. And even just the Blue Ridge, and, blue is my favorite color. Like, I think the further the longer you're away from home, I think the more it becomes a factor in your imagination, and maybe it shapes, who you are and how you think of yourself. And when you meet people, even for the first time, who are from your hometown or from your home region, there's a weird kind of affinity and an understanding that surpasses culture. I don't know. I mean, it's obviously kind of related to culture, but it surpasses the years that would have passed that would have made your culture actually all that similar. There's just something about like the land that holds you, and we emerge from there, and I think we recognize that in each other sometimes. Yeah.
You talked about Appalachian culture. Are you writing mostly about Appalachian culture in the past, or the present, or the juxtaposition?
Yeah, good question. So asking if I'm writing about Appalachian culture, in the present or in the past. I work really hard to present Appalachian culture and the beauty of the region. So both contemporary and ancient and in between, because there are often stereotypes of the region that are incredibly negative and biased, and I often want to depict other perspectives of the region, because yes, there is the mining and the devastation, but even as friends send me, good news about, the lavender harvesting, on old coal mine regions, and, that people try to, reinvigorate lands that have been wasted. And sometimes, so it's kind of a combination, but I'm often drawn to finding just like the beauty of broken down barns and, that are fallen down. Like I love the beauty of the region, and so I want to call attention to that, because so often it's the poverty and the impoverished region, and it's not only that.
It's a very rich culture, and
old culture.
Back to Middle English.
Yeah.
These things are being preserved.
Mm-hmm. And fortunately, they're calling back. There's a woman who has a YouTube channel where she talks about Appalachian dialects and language, and it is rich, and it is old English, and so there are definitely there are hidden and rich beauties and a wealth to the culture that I just want to do my part to call attention to. Yeah.
How much of this do you add to your teaching?
It's interesting. For a while, because I also, as part of my interest in sustainable agriculture, I did a lot of research and investigation into entomophagy, or raising edible insects for livestock and for human consumption. And that I was really pretty active in bringing into the classroom. And even though students were incredibly averse to, that, and ew, bugs and crickets and don't eat that, I still, felt a mission to it, and I probably try to protect some of the the cultural references a little more. I don't think I bring it into the classroom much. I do bring the nature in a lot, and I'm constantly trying to give my students access. I often feel like I'm, and I teach them in their writings to give access to their readers for whatever they have access to. And so I think of myself that way to nature because I did grow up just surrounded by the Jefferson National Forest was around our house. And, of course, we had the farm experience, and not that many of the students have direct farm experience and things like that. But Appalachia, I think I grew up really, you didn't even want to be thought of as Appalachian. It was really kind of shameful. And being middle class, it was like, we're not Appalachian, or we would have never called ourselves that, or it almost was a dirty word. It would have seemed like a dirty word to anybody in my immediate sort of vicinity and community. And so there's a long habit of kind of distancing myself from Appalachia. But then, I also have fierce pride and all of that. So it's kind of fraught. But with my students, I tell them, but, especially when we talk about identity keywords and finding our communities that we can belong to, I use those keywords, but I don't often elaborate or kind of really tell them how complicated it is. And the culture of unspoken, the language of the body, and that which sort of just under the current of understanding that people are communicating with you on such a subtle level. It trained me as a poet. I know that my training as a poet came from that which wasn't said but was implied by a silence, in a particular situation, or by a glance. Everything was spoken really subtly. So yeah. Thank you for asking. Thank you all so much. This was fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Would you have a request? Do you have a request? Oh, I don't want to read the whole pray, because this is poetry. That's the essay about the bobcat that I told you the story. Well, okay. Well, it's prose. This was a story I told just before you came in. I told the story that this happened in my backyard. Pray with an E, not an A. I was about to send an email when my eye glanced something at the window. It was stalking the border of the wood that borders my backyard, and bigger than the tomcat that prowls the area. Its eyes were trained on something in the crepe myrtle, whose fuchsia blossoms peaked and fell weeks ago with the most recent rain. I yanked the blinds up for a better view. The bobcat did not twitch a single long whisker. This hunt had nothing to do with me. Its taupe coat was unspotted, its head regal, with high cheekbones and white outlines around its eyes. Likely it was famished to be hunting midday in a neighborhood rather than at night by the nearby Cumberland River. When the leaves are down, barges churn up and down the 688-mile course that transports goods between Kentucky and Tennessee, but only their horns penetrate summer's curtain of foliage. A recent heat wave and lack of rainfall may have made wildlife desperate. Judging by size, the bobcat was probably male. I thought he was eyeing a fat robin in the rustling branches until the movement hopped to the ground. A squirrel turned left and right, scanning the ground around it like a waiter during lunch shift. I did not root for the squirrel. Member of those legions who tear pell-mell across my roof in chase of rivals and partners and land hard when they leap from the pin oak. But I resonated with its obliviousness. Only a minute before had I been conscious of the drama unfolding beside my desk. Under the bobcat's coat, every muscle arranged itself. Behind the window, I squatted on my haunches to position myself closer to eye level. A tendon in his shoulder quivered as he pulled forward in one slow-motion step. Though manic, the squirrel looked unaware of him. I held my breath. I wanted and did not want to see the predator tear into its white belly. Bloodbath or not, I would not turn away. Only once before had I been so held by the intensity of an impersonal moment. My friend Josh had taken me to a local firing range and taught me how to fire his Remington 700, a military-grade sniper rifle, though he did not serve in the military. When the hammer fell onto the Federal Gold Medal Match 308, it slammed my attention into the present. Nothing existed before or after the bullet as it traveled down the barrel and into the air, a star that burned through the target 25 yards away. All afternoon I practiced while he instructed me to compensate for wind resistance and the increasing heat of the barrel. My attention cleared with the cloudless sky until one shot came within a fraction of an inch from the bullseye. Wherever you are is the entry point, says the Indian poet and mystic Kabir. But rarely do I enter. Instead, I turn to the ding of a text or thought, my attention on an idea of the world rather than the world itself, and the moments pass. The bobcat eased forward another step, tightening the coil of his single-minded focus. In contrast, the squirrel looked hapless, a clown, soon to be the object of violence. When the bobcat sprang, the squirrel dashed for a cedar tree, safe base from the neighbor's collie, but the cat pursued just as nimbly. 8 feet up, the squirrel aborted plan and leaped to the ground, taking a running start for the woods. The bobcat was 5 times its size, with a stride that could outpace it yard for yard, but the squirrel scrambled around the compost bin like a kid brother circling a dining room table. The cat reached it as it skidded away, and they headed together into the pocket of the forest they had just made wild. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy, and thank you for having her read that. That was amazing. You could just see it and feel the tension. What a glorious evening, and I so appreciate Amy coming down to be with us, and those of you who are gathered for this evening to hear some incredible poetry. We are here for a good reason, to share the wisdom and the words of so many local poets in our community. And we invite you every 4th Thursday of the month, except for November and December because of the holidays. It's the 3rd Thursday of the month. And we appreciate your support, being here and watching, and your financial support, because that keeps us able to do this. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being here, and may your evening be blessed.